أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وبعد. We begin in the name of Allah Azza wa Jal by asking Him to send peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. May his peace and blessings be upon him and his family. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought us to verse number 125 of Surah Aal-Imraan. And these particular set of verses that inshallah we'll be covering, that we actually started yesterday and we'll be covering today, most of the Mufassirin said that these are in reference to the Ghazwa of Badr, to the Battle of Badr, and a reference to the assistance and the aid that was given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during this Battle of Badr. A couple of notes just before we get into the verses here on the context for Badr itself. You know, we as a Muslim community, we know how the battle ended. So we can oftentimes, when we're reading this in history, we look at it, we know that the Muslims were victorious. But for the people who fought in that battle, they did not have any such they didn't have that prospect in mind necessarily. Of course, they knew that they were fighting for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Allah will always be victorious. But many of them, when they left their homes in Medina, they did not know that they would be coming back alive. They had no clue. They had no clue about that. So many of them that left their home, especially the Ansaris, especially the people of Medina that fought alongside the Prophet ﷺ, they thought that once we leave, we're not coming back. We're going to die on the battlefield. I mean, even the odds, right? You have 313 Muslims, and you have 1,000 of the Quraysh. The odds are stacked against you. Back in that time, before you had modern artillery and warfare, the numbers were what determined oftentimes the battle of the outcome of the battle. The larger the army, the more likely it was that you would win. So they're looking at an army 3 times their size. And they're being asked to, go up against them and defeat them. This was an improbability. Maybe not an impossibility, but an improbability in the minds of many of those early believers. And yet they knew, alhamdulillah, they knew that whatever we do, the Prophet ﷺ himself made dua so strongly the night before Badr that even Abu Bakr as-Siddiq came to him and said, Ya Rasulullah, you need to rest. Right? They said that he could see his hands were so high in dua that the whites of his armpits could be seen. That's how much dua the Prophet ﷺ was making. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions in these verses what happened during that. He begins with and if we say in verse number 125, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bala in tasbiru wa tattaqu wa ya'tukum min fawrihim hada yumdidkum rabbukum bi khamsati alafim min al-malaikati musawwimin. He's answering the previous question, the previous verse, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, remember when you said to the believers, is it not sufficient for you that your Lord should reinforce you with 3,000 angels that would be sent down? Bala. Yes, if you remain patient and conscious of Allah and the enemy comes upon you attacking in rage, your Lord will reinforce you with 5,000 angels, having marks of distinction. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, وَمَا جَعَلَهُ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بُشْرَى لَكُمْ وَلِتَطْمَئِنَّ قُلُوبُكُمْ بِهِ وَمَا النَّصْرُ إِلَّا مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ الْعَزِيزِ الْحَكِيمِ. And Allah made it not except as a sign of good tidings for you and to reassure your hearts thereby. And victory is not except with Allah, the exalted in might and the wise. So there's an idea here that the angels were sent. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down reinforcements to the Muslims to reinforce the army that they had and to give them victory over the believers. Now, there's some debate within the Islamic tradition about whether the angels were spiritual aids, as Imam al-Zamakhshari says, or whether they were actually physically there in the battlefield. But what is clear from these verses is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent them help. Right? Whether it was, and there's some narrations as to what did it look like? Did the angels, were they dressed in battle clothes themselves? Were they on the battle? Were they invisible forces that were helping? It's unknown. But what is known is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala affirms that He sent help to the believers in order to give them, as it mentioned in the second verse here, تَطْمَئِنَّ قُلُوبُهُم, that their hearts would be tranquil. Their hearts would be tranquil. Right? And this is really important for us. Because when you're in a heightened state of alert or awareness, you're not tranquil. And if you're in the heat of the battlefield and you're fighting and all of your adrenaline is being used in that, you may make rash decisions. You may be able to, you may not know, you may have, there are people that die in friendly fire in battles all the time. Why? Because they get killed by their own comrade. And here it is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying that He sent them tranquility. He allowed their hearts to rest. He allowed them to come to some type of peacefulness, and He reinforced them, reinforced their ranks with those who could help and defeat the enemy. And we know, in fact, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he ended up victorious after the battle. Improbable odds. Again, not impossible, but improbable odds. And the Muslims won. And they actually won, subhanAllah, with very few casualties. Very few casualties. Not even that many Muslims died in the battle itself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala making reference to them, reminding them that when they thought they were weak, He gave them strength. He fortified them. And this is an important lesson for us, brothers and sisters. We have to go about the job of just giving da'wah and doing our best. Of maintaining our... Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us tawfiq. That's where it comes from. Where we make our sacrifices, we put our, we go out there, we do the best that we can, and it's in that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us tawfiq. And He'll help us. You can't be sitting at home wishing for change. That's not how it works. Right? One of my teachers once mentioned actually about miracles. I think I've mentioned this here before. He said miracles only happened to the prophets when they were actually doing something. When they were doing something. Musa alayhi salam, he had to march with his people all the way to the edge of the sea. He had to get there. Now you have to imagine, as he's marching there, they know the sea is ahead of them. They know that. It's not that the sea came out of nowhere. They know that they're marching in this direction. They're going to get all the way to the sea. He doesn't know what's going to happen once he gets to the sea. And then what happens? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, strike your staff. And He strikes the staff and the sea parts. So that the people of the Bani Israel can cross over. Why? How did that miracle happen? Because he was doing the work. As one of my teachers said, he was already in motion. He was already doing the work, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him a miracle. We have to recognize this. It doesn't just happen if we're sitting in front of our televisions wishing for change, that somehow there's going to be change that's going to happen. We have to be doing the work, brothers and sisters. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these believers, they were out in the battlefield and odds that were against them. And Allah fortified them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them glad tidings. And then He even says, لِيَقْطَعَ طَرَفًا مِنَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَوْ يَكْبِتَهُمْ فَيَنْقَلِبُوا خَائِبِينَ. Subhanallah. That He might cut down a section of the disbelievers or suppress them so that they turn back disappointed. You see that? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't just give the Muslims a miracle. He actually took care of a section of the disbelievers. Saying, this is now, we've We've given them, we've taken care of them. You don't have to worry about them. They turned back disappointed. Here it was that they thought they were going to have victory. Here it was they thought they were going to annihilate the Muslims. Here it was they thought that there's going to be no more Islam that we have to deal with after this day. And yet what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? The exact opposite. They said in some of the narrations that the Quraysh, they brought like music and drums and festival. They were going to like celebrate. That their women and their children came to celebrate this great victory that was going to happen at Badr. And yet what happens? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala flips the script on them, changes it. You may plan and think that you are going to win, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately is in control. He is in control. This, brothers and sisters, I want to just highlight something. It's not just that the Prophet ﷺ, we fought in the battle and they won. There was a lot of planning that was also involved. I'll give you an example of the type of planning. The Prophet ﷺ, the Battle of Badr Badr is the name of 3 wells, 3 sets of wells that were in between Mecca and Medina. That's where they met in the battle. And the Prophet ﷺ was ready to meet the army at the furthest well, the one that was closest to Mecca. Hubab ibn Mundir came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, Rasulullah, is this wahi from Allah, or is this your personal opinion on what the strategy should be in war? And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, this is not wahi, this is not revelation, this is just my strategy, what I think we should do. Hubab ibn Mundir said, I think I have a better idea. Sure. Now, this is also very interesting, right? Because the Sahaba, if they knew it was wahi from Allah, they wouldn't challenge it. This is commandment from Allah, we're not going to challenge it. But in this case, he was told, this is not from Allah. This is from the Prophet ﷺ. He says, look, there's 3 wells. 1, 2, 3. We are at the well that's going to meet them here. I say we go all the way back to the 3rd well. And the first 2 wells, we cover with rocks. Because the Quraysh, they will have been marching from Mecca. They will know that the water is here at this well. They'll be expecting it. And then we'll see that the well has been dug out. Then they go to the 2nd well expecting, okay, well, we're going to now get provisions and water here at the 2nd well. They'll also see that that's dug out. By the time they get to the 3rd well, they will be very thirsty. Their caravan will be very thirsty. Their horses and everybody will be very thirsty. And we will be ready at that well to do battle with them. See that, brothers and sisters? That's strategy. That strategy. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, we will go with the plan of Hubab ibn Mundir. He wasn't afraid that, I'm the messenger of God and you're just some lowly person, so I'm not going to pay attention to you. No. He said, look, this is wise. We're going to go with that. And that's actually how they fought the Battle of Badr. By the time the Quraysh came to the wells, they were expecting water, they were hungry, tired, thirsty, they'd already been marching for some time. And the Muslims met them in that battlefield at that state. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent reinforcements to ensure their victory. Brothers and sisters, I want to just highlight here, nothing happens without planning. Really. Nothing happens without planning. And if you look at the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, you see that it's filled with incidences in which he was planning on how to go about doing the da'wah. Even we covered last night in the seerah class about the people of Yathrib that came to negotiate with the Prophet ﷺ. He was the one that was, he had a whole plan. He talked to them. Let's see, they go back to your community, teach people about Islam, see if they're receptive. This is all done with planning. Very important for us, brothers and sisters, not to be, not to just be emotional about things, but rather be measured. Look into how we can plan. And if we continue on the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will reinforce us, give us tawfiq. and reinforce us and give us peace of mind. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us always. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the best in this world and the next, and protect us from the punishment of the fire. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us and all those who have died before us in faith, and erase from our hearts any ill feelings towards others. Indeed, He is most merciful and forgiving. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ وَاجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا رَبَّنَا اغْفِرْ لَنَا وَلِوَالِدِينَا وَلِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَوْمَ يَقُومُ الْحِسَابُ رَبَّنَا اغْفِرْ لَنَا وَلِإِخْوَانِنَا الَّذِينَ سَبَقُونَا بِالْإِيمَانِ وَلَا تَجْعَلْ فِي قُلُوبِنَا غِلًّا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا رَبَّنَا إِنَّكَ رَءُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.